What if everything you believed about getting old was wrong? That question looped in Frank Delaney's head like a stubborn radio jingle as he stood barefoot in the dark, scalding coffee dripping down his wrist, his hand clenched in pain, and a string of whispered curses escaping his lips. He'd misjudged the counter again. The cup had tipped, then shattered. Another mess. Another moment that told him, quietly but cruelly, that he wasn't who he used to be. He stood frozen in the tiny kitchen of his one-bedroom home in rural Michigan, the cold linoleum against his heels, the smell of burnt coffee bitter in the air. He wasn't fully blind. Not yet. But close enough. Shapes, shadows, light, those still danced around the edges. But color? Detail? Gone. The world was gray and foggy, like looking through a window smeared with oil. He grabbed a towel, dabbed at his hand, and sighed, feeling that familiar heaviness settle into his chest. It was the same weight that arrived every morning before sunrise and stayed until he finally gave up trying to matter. He hadn't spoken to anyone in 3 days. The TV murmured in the background, tuned to a news channel out of habit more than interest. It was noise. A substitute for human voices. Until one particular voice cut through the static and made him pause. Neuralink researchers believe we may be just years away from restoring sight to the blind, said a calm female anchor. Then came the clip. Elon Musk's voice, flat, logical, yet weirdly passionate, filled the kitchen. The brain doesn't care how information gets there. It's just electrical signals. We're working on a way to bypass the damaged eye entirely. Input data straight to the visual cortex. It's not science fiction. Frank blinked, his fingers frozen around the towel. He knew the name. Everyone did. Elon Musk, the guy who launched rockets, built electric cars, talked about Mars like it was his backyard. Frank had dismissed him as another Silicon Valley billionaire, a talker, maybe even a little crazy. But now, that voice didn't sound crazy. It sounded certain. And something about that certainty hit Frank like a jolt. He muttered aloud, "Yeah, sure. Maybe in 10 years. For someone else." Still, the spark had ignited. As the voice trailed off and the segment returned to inflation numbers, Frank shuffled toward the worn recliner by the window and whispered, "Alexa, play more about Neuralink." The device chirped to life. Another clip played. This one from an interview. "What keeps me going," Elon was saying, "is knowing that every major problem we face has a solution. You just have to be bold enough to chase it." Frank closed his eyes and let those words sink in. Bold. That used to be him. Back in the 70s and 80s, wiring houses from scratch, solving problems others couldn't figure out. He wasn't a genius, but he had good hands. Could fix anything with wire, heat, and intuition. Rosie used to call him, her electric man. He smiled at the memory, then flinched. That smile hurt. Too many years had passed since her laugh filled this house. She died a dozen years ago, quick and quiet, a stroke that came like a thief in the night. After that, his vision had started to go. Slowly at first, then with cruel momentum. Diabetes, the doctor had said. Avoidable, maybe, if he'd caught it earlier. But who has time for checkups when you're grieving and stubborn and don't want to ask for help? Emily, their daughter, had begged him to move closer to her outside Grand Rapids. But he refused. "I'm fine," he'd said. Pride. It always came before the fall. And now, there he was. 71, mostly blind, talking to his digital assistant, and hoping Elon Musk had the answer. The ridiculousness of it made him laugh, and then suddenly he wasn't laughing. He was crying. Not the loud, movie-style sobs. Just quiet tears rolling down a leathery cheek. Maybe it wasn't the idea of seeing again that broke him. Maybe it was the idea that someone, somewhere, still thought impossible things were worth chasing. That night, Frank couldn't sleep. He lay in bed listening to a podcast he found on Neuralink, and Elon's voice came through again. The real risk, he said, is inaction. Most people don't realize that not trying is more dangerous than failing. That line stayed with him. He woke up at 3:17 a.m., heart racing, palms sweaty. He got out of bed, careful not to trip over the rug he always forgot to move, and made his way to the garage. It was dusty, full of boxes, junk, and the smell of old oil. He hadn't set foot in there in years. Somewhere in the far corner, under a faded tarp, was a battered old workbench. He ran his hand across it. Dust clung to his fingers. He found the drawer that used to hold tools. Still did. He smiled. He pulled out a soldering iron. Plugged it in. Waited. Burned his finger. Cursed. Laughed. Then grabbed a small speaker from an old radio and began to tinker. Not to build anything useful. Just to move. To touch. To remember. His hands moved slow, clumsy, but they remembered. Within an hour, he had wired the speaker to play sound from his phone. A useless contraption. But it worked. And in that moment, Frank felt alive. The next day, he left a voicemail for Emily. He didn't mention his eyes or Neuralink or the coffee spill. He just said, "Hey kiddo. I built something last night. In the garage. Like the old days." Then hung up before she could answer. It wasn't a reconciliation. But it was a start. That afternoon, he stumbled outside and sat on the porch, the solder-burnt finger wrapped in gauze. He leaned back, face turned toward the pale sun, and whispered the words again, "The brain doesn't care how the info gets there." He didn't know what it meant yet. But for the first time in years, he was curious. Curious enough to dig through the garage again. Curious enough to Google, voice search, how to build simple electronics for the blind. Maybe the real lie wasn't that he couldn't see. Maybe the real lie was that he had nothing left to see for. That night, he recorded a shaky voice note on his phone. "Today, I built a speaker with my hands. I used to think the best parts of my life were behind me. Maybe they're not. Maybe I've just been waiting to find a reason to build again." He saved the file. Thought about uploading it. Didn't. Not yet. But the thought stayed. Like the echo of something old and powerful waking back up. And somewhere, far above him in the sky, a SpaceX satellite passed silently overhead, unnoticed by the world below, but somehow, on this strange, hopeful night, seen by a man who couldn't see. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Frank Delaney wasn't born to fade away quietly. He came from a long line of Irish tradesmen who believed in calloused hands, fixed things instead of replacing them, and never said, "I love you," unless it was muttered through a closed bathroom door or a bite of meatloaf. He grew up in Lansing, Michigan, the son of a telephone lineman and a mother who ironed sheets at a motel. Money was always tight, but pride was abundant. He could still remember the day he first picked up a screwdriver and opened the back panel of his family's Zenith TV. He was 12. His father walked in, took one look, and instead of scolding him, just nodded once and said, "Don't kill yourself." That was the beginning. By 17, he was running his own side business fixing radios and doorbells for old neighbors who paid in casseroles or wrinkled dollar bills. After high school, while others chased college degrees, Frank chased wires. Apprenticed with an old-world electrician who smoked menthols and believed electricity had moods. He was married by 24 to Rosie Mendez, a fiery Cuban-American woman who worked the bakery counter at Meijer and had a laugh that could wake the dead. They danced to Elvis in the kitchen and never had much money, but they had heat. They had energy. They had Emily, born on a bitter January night when the power went out, and Frank delivered his daughter by flashlight while yelling at the paramedics over a rotary phone. Those were the golden years. The ones that glowed in memory. He wired homes by day, came home smelling of sawdust and metal, and spent his nights eating Rosie's rice and beans, watching Emily scribble dinosaurs on the back of electric bills. The world was tactile, alive, fixable. He loved problems because they could be solved. And then, time happened. Slowly at first. A job lost when the company merged. A fall from a ladder that left his back aching every morning. Then Rosie's diagnosis, a lump, a blur, appointments, then silence. And finally, her absence. That's when it began, the long slide. After she passed, Frank went quieter. Emily tried. She brought him groceries, offered to stay weekends, even set him up with a counselor he never called. He couldn't explain it, not then. But it was like color drained from everything. He still wired the occasional basement or fixed a neighbor's light switch, but the spark was gone. And then came the vision. Or rather, the slow erosion of it. First, it was the glare of headlights. Then the small print. He told himself it was just age, just tiredness. He bumped into the coffee table twice, then once into a parked car. Finally, a trip to the eye doctor, then the specialist. Diabetic retinopathy. Words that felt made up, like the enemy was both medical and poetic. He tried the treatments, lasers, injections, vitamins, but the vision kept retreating like a tide he couldn't hold back. Eventually, he stopped driving. Then stopped walking too far. Then stopped reaching for the light switch because what was the point? Days blurred into one another. Morning radio, afternoon silence, evening news. He kept the TV on for company and the porch light on for no one. The mail piled up. Emily called. Less often. Who could blame her? He was always curt, distracted, unwilling to admit he was afraid. He told her not to come. She listened. Then, one day, his old buddy Jerry stopped by. Jerry, who used to do HVAC, now in a wheelchair from a stroke, rolled into the living room and said, "You're disappearing, Frank." Frank laughed and said, "I've been disappearing since Reagan." Jerry didn't laugh. Just said, "You used to be electric. Remember?" And that word, electric, clung to Frank like static. He did remember. Not the jobs or the tools. But the feeling. Of making something come alive. Of solving something no one else could. And now, here he was, a man in the dark with more years behind him than ahead, wondering if all of it had been a slow wind down to silence. That was until Elon Musk's voice interrupted his resignation. A voice from a man who built rockets while most people argued over gas prices. A man who made mistakes, big ones, but always forward. And somehow, that forward motion, that refusal to settle, hit Frank like voltage through copper. Because maybe, just maybe, he wasn't done. He didn't care much about Mars. But he cared about building. That night in bed, long before the garage moment, he began to remember things. Not with sadness, but with texture. The weight of a hammer, the smell of solder, the hum of a breaker box, Rosie's fingers squeezing his arm when the baby kicked, Emily's chubby hands pressing buttons on his old calculator, the time he installed a generator during a storm and the whole block cheered when the lights came back on. That was power. Not electricity. Purpose. He whispered to the ceiling, "What if I tried again?" But tried what? His hands weren't steady like before. His eyes were unreliable. His back screamed if he bent for more than 5 minutes. But there was something in his gut that hadn't died yet. It just needed permission. And Elon, damn him, gave it. Not directly. Not personally. But through that unapologetic certainty that things could change. Not for the young. Not for the brilliant. But for anyone. If they were bold enough. The next morning, Frank found his way to the dusty bookshelf in his living room. Ran his fingers along the spines until he found it. A book Rosie had gifted him 30 years ago, Basic Electronics for Home Repair. Inside was her note, for my favorite spark plug. Keep lighting up the world. He held it to his chest. Not for sentiment. For fuel. That day, he opened a browser using voice commands and said, "How do you build a speaker from scrap parts?" The result made him laugh. He couldn't even see the screen properly. But he listened to tutorials. Felt his way through diagrams. Touched the past with new hands. When he burned his fingers soldering, it hurt like hell. But it hurt, and that was good. It meant he was alive. He wired the speaker. Clumsily. Wrong twice. But on the third try, it buzzed to life. Played a tinny radio station that faded in and out. He stared, blindly, at it for a long time. Not because it worked. But because he did it. Then he picked up the phone and called Emily. She didn't answer. He didn't expect her to. Their last conversation had ended with her yelling, "I don't know how to help you anymore, Dad," and him replying, "Then don't." Still, he left a message. "Hey kiddo. Built a thing today. A little speaker. From junk. Just like the old days. Thought you'd like to know." Then hung up. No begging. No guilt. Just truth. That night, he sat on the porch and listened to the wind. Not in sadness, but in waiting. Something had shifted. Not big. Not cinematic. Just a notch. Like turning a dial on an old radio and hearing a new frequency underneath the static. He went to bed with a spark in his chest. And a voice in his head, Elon's voice, saying, "The real risk is inaction." He whispered back, "Okay, then." And meant it. The next morning started like most others, with darkness. Not the kind that vanishes when the sun rises, but the permanent haze that wrapped Frank's world like an old wool blanket. He heard the familiar grind of the furnace kicking on, felt the cold floor beneath his bare feet, and shuffled into the kitchen where he reached, carefully, for the coffee maker. This time he moved slower, remembering yesterday's burn. Still, his fingers brushed the edge of the counter awkwardly. The ceramic mug trembled in his grip. It wasn't fear, it was something worse. Doubt. A creeping awareness that his own body didn't trust itself anymore. He poured the coffee without spilling. Small win. But when he sat at the kitchen table, cradling the warmth in his hands, the questions came. Was this spark he'd felt real? Or just a side effect of nostalgia and sleep deprivation? Was he chasing something meaningful, or just a memory? The speaker he'd built still sat on the workbench in the garage. It was crude, half-wired, humming inconsistently, but it worked. Sort of. That mattered. Or at least, it had yesterday. This morning, the voices in his head were louder. Not Elon's, but older ones. His doctor's voice came back, echoing from that sterile office 2 years ago, after his last eye scan. "You need to slow down, Frank. Accept the limits. Focus on comfort and safety." Frank had smiled then, nodded politely, and gone home to sit in a chair for 5 straight days. He hadn't been back since. His daughter's voice joined the chorus. "Dad, I don't want to argue. But you can't keep pretending this is temporary." That had been a year ago, the last real fight. He'd told her she was overreacting. She'd told him she was done begging him to let her in. Both of them were half right. Frank set down his mug and muttered, "So what now?" The silence answered him. The house was still, like it was holding its breath. Even the refrigerator seemed quieter, as if waiting for a decision. He stood slowly, bones creaking like old floorboards, and walked back into the living room. "Alexa," he said, "play recent Neuralink news." The digital assistant chirped, then a robotic voice began narrating. Neuralink's most recent public demo showed progress in brain-computer interface technology. While still in early stages, researchers believe a non-visual input could one day be translated directly into the visual cortex, offering hope for the visually impaired. Frank cut it off. He'd heard that part before. What he wanted wasn't the science. It was the mindset. The refusal to accept decline as a destination. He didn't care about tech lingo. He cared about energy. He walked toward the hallway closet, bumping lightly into the corner as he passed. Inside was a box he hadn't opened in 5 years, his old electrician tools. He pulled it down carefully, sat on the floor, and opened the lid. The smell hit him first. Metal, dust, oil, and time. His fingers brushed over a pair of needle-nose pliers, then a spool of copper wire, a voltage tester, a multimeter. His hands remembered. The tools were older now, a little rusted, like him. But they still fit in his palm like they belonged there. He picked up the pliers and squeezed. Click. Click. Still strong. Still functional. He whispered, "So am I." He didn't realize he'd said it aloud until the words bounced off the walls. Back in the garage, Frank began clearing space. It wasn't dramatic or fast. It took most of the afternoon just to organize a few shelves and sweep the cement floor, but he moved with a quiet kind of purpose. The act of doing something, even something small, felt like stretching after years of sitting. It hurt. But it was the kind of hurt that told you were alive. While he worked, his mind wandered. Not to Rosie or Emily this time, but to the idea of building something that helped people like him. Not a miracle cure, not a Neuralink implant, but something real, tangible, small enough to hold, simple enough to make. He thought about the ways he navigated his house. The bumps on the microwave he'd stuck on with puffy paint. The way he used sound, TV volume, squeaky floorboards, to gauge where he was. Could he build something better? Something adaptive? He wasn't sure. But the question stayed with him. That night, after dinner, a bowl of chili from a can, he sat down with a legal pad and a black marker and began to sketch. He couldn't see the lines, not really, but his hand moved anyway. The ideas were there. A device that sensed proximity and sent out a signal. An earpiece that buzzed depending on distance. Maybe even voice prompts. He wasn't reinventing the wheel. But he was trying to make it roll again. He stayed up late, scribbling, tapping, muttering to himself like a mad scientist in slow motion. For the first time in a long time, he didn't check the clock. He didn't worry about sleep. He was in it. In the flow. In the fight. At some point, he picked up his phone and recorded a voice memo. "Day 2, he said. I'm thinking about building a navigation aid. Something cheap. Something you could make at home. I don't know if it'll work. But the point isn't if it works. The point is, I need to try." He didn't send it to anyone. Just saved it. Like a letter to himself. The next morning, he ordered a few parts online. Cheap sensors, buzzers, a breadboard. It would take a week to arrive, but the waiting didn't bother him. He had momentum now. Something to wake up for. He spent the next few days organizing the garage, labeling drawers with braille stickers, setting up a small work table with a magnifying light he couldn't really use but liked having anyway. It felt like setting up a stage, even if the audience was only one man. On Thursday, the neighbor's grandson came by to mow the lawn. Frank didn't need the help, but he paid him anyway, mostly for the conversation. The kid, Noah, was 17, curious, polite in that awkward teenage way. "What's all this?" he asked, looking into the garage. Frank grinned. "This," he said, "is the future." Noah laughed. "What, like flying cars?" "No," Frank said. "Like building something when the world tells you you're done." The kid nodded slowly, not fully understanding but respectful. Frank liked him. He told him about Neuralink, about Elon Musk, about the idea of fixing what people said couldn't be fixed. Noah asked if he could come back and watch him work. Frank said yes. That night, he sat on the porch, listening to the wind again. But this time, he wasn't alone in the silence. The garage lights glowed behind him. His hands were dirty. His mind was full. The doubt wasn't gone, but it was quieter now, like background static beneath a stronger signal. He spoke aloud, to no one in particular. It's not about seeing again. It's about building again. The stars above shimmered, indifferent and infinite. But Frank didn't feel small. He felt connected. Like part of something bigger. Something beginning. And somewhere, hundreds of miles away, Elon Musk probably had no idea that a retired, half-blind electrician in Michigan was quoting him in a garage full of old tools and new dreams. But that didn't matter. What mattered was that the fire was lit. The package arrived 5 days later, dropped quietly at the door by a delivery driver who never rang the bell. Frank heard the soft thump, then the familiar beep from his motion sensor, a cheap one Emily had installed when his vision began to slip. He shuffled carefully to the front step, tapping his cane twice as he descended the single stair. The box was light, plastic parts, wires, connectors, maybe a few buzzers. He cradled it like treasure and brought it to the garage, feeling a pulse of energy he hadn't felt in years. His workshop had transformed. The dust was gone, replaced by labeled bins, a few cheap lights, and a new folding chair he'd picked up from the local hardware store. He couldn't see the room clearly, but he could feel the difference. It was clean. Ready. Alive. He opened the box slowly, fingers moving deliberately over each part. Ultrasonic sensors, little plastic domes with 2 tiny lenses, eyes, almost. Mini motors, a breadboard, wires, resistors. Nothing fancy. Nothing expensive. But full of possibility. He began sorting the pieces, organizing them by feel and memory, just like he used to when wiring fuse boxes or building custom alarm systems in the 90s. The garage hummed softly with an old space heater, and outside, snow began to fall in slow-motion spirals. Frank didn't notice. He was deep in it now, focused, humming to himself, occasionally muttering, left goes to ground, right goes to input under his breath. The idea wasn't new. A simple device that used distance sensors to detect obstacles and send out feedback through a small vibration motor or audio cue. But what made this different, to him, was that it wasn't for profit. It wasn't for a client. It was for people. People like him, who'd been told to sit down and stay safe. People who still had curiosity burning in their chest but no map forward. And more than that, it was for him. Frank worked for 3 straight hours that first day, stopping only when his stomach growled and his back screamed in protest. He hadn't eaten lunch. Hadn't noticed. In the kitchen, he nuked a frozen burrito and leaned against the counter, smiling to himself. The prototype was half finished, wires hanging loose, but the sensor lit up when he waved his hand in front of it. Progress. That night, lying in bed, he imagined where this might go. He didn't fantasize about going viral or launching a company. That wasn't the point. He imagined showing others, maybe even Emily, that old dogs didn't just learn new tricks. Sometimes, they invented them. He imagined building a small community of people like him, late in life, partially sighted or fully blind, fed up with being told to be careful. People who could tinker, test, build. Maybe even share blueprints. Maybe he could call it something. Vision Forge. Or Lightback. The names didn't matter yet. The feeling did. The next morning, Noah showed up again. He knocked twice, then peeked into the garage. "Hey, Frank. That offer's still open." Frank grinned, wiping grease from his fingers. "Only if you're okay being underpaid and overeducated." Noah laughed and stepped inside, snow on his boots, breath clouding in the cold air. Over the next few hours, Frank explained the basics, how the sensors worked, how the signal would trigger a small vibration motor mounted on a wristband. It was primitive, but promising. Noah asked smart questions, took notes on his phone, and offered to 3D print a housing for the device at school. Frank raised an eyebrow. "You know how to do that?" "Yeah," Noah said. "We've got printers in the STEM lab. I can model something simple in Tinkercad and print it this week." Frank paused. This kid was more than curious. He was interested. The kind of interest Frank used to feel every time a circuit came to life. "All right then," he said. "You're hired. Pay is a slice of frozen pizza and occasional wisdom." They worked for hours. Frank mostly guided with his voice and hands, while Noah handled the parts too small for Frank's eyes to track. It was an awkward dance at first, but it settled into rhythm. By the end of the second day, they had a prototype, a clunky wristband with a sensor mounted on top and a small coin vibration motor connected to the back. When an object came within 4 feet, the motor buzzed gently. Closer than 2 feet, it buzzed more aggressively. Crude. Ugly. But functional. Noah filmed a short clip of it working, posted it on his private Instagram account, and added the caption, "Building something cool with a retired electrician who can barely see but sees more than most." Frank didn't see the post, but he felt it. Felt the energy shift in the room. Something was happening. That night, Emily called. Frank's heart skipped when he saw her name flash on his screen. He debated letting it go to voicemail, but answered on the 3rd ring. "Hey," he said, voice neutral. "Hey, Dad." She sounded cautious. "Noah posted something about a project?" Frank smiled. "Yeah. We're building a little navigation device. Helps detect distance and gives feedback through vibrations. For the blind, or the almost blind." Silence on the line. "Then, you're doing electronics again?" "Not just electronics," he said. "I'm building again." She didn't respond right away. He could hear her breathing. I didn't know you were still trying." "I wasn't," he said. "But something changed." "What changed?" He thought about how to explain it. Then said, "Elon Musk said something about inaction being the real danger." I believed him. More silence. Then a small laugh. "Only you would take life advice from Elon Musk." Frank laughed too. "Well, someone had to knock the dust off me." She exhaled. "Can I come visit this weekend?" Frank's throat tightened. He hadn't seen her in nearly a year. "Yeah. I'd like that." The next day, the device broke. It short-circuited when they tried to power the motor off a battery pack. Frank felt the frustration boil up instantly. All the momentum, all the excitement, gone in a whiff of burnt plastic. "It's fine," Noah said quickly. "We can rebuild it." But Frank felt it deeper. Not just the failure, but the familiar echo of limitation. His fingers fumbled now. His eyes lied to him. The work would always be harder. Slower. It would never be like it used to be. That night, he sat alone in the garage, staring into the dark. The burned part still smoked faintly on the bench. He clenched his fists. "Maybe they're right," he whispered. "Maybe this is stupid." Then, as if on cue, a voice from his phone began to play, a clip he hadn't requested. One of the old Neuralink interviews. Elon's voice again, "Failure is an option here. If things are not failing, you are not innovating enough." Frank stared at the phone. Then he laughed. "All right, Elon. I get it." The next morning, he rebuilt it from scratch. Noah came by after school, saw the new wiring, and nodded in approval. "Looks cleaner than the last version." "It is," Frank said. Because I screwed up the first one. Guess that makes you a real innovator now. Frank grinned. I've always been one. Just forgot for a while. By the time Emily arrived that weekend, the prototype was working again. Still crude. Still wired with tape and old parts. But it worked. When she stepped into the garage and saw her father leaning over a circuit board, hands steady, eyes squinting, shoulders squared, she stopped cold. Dad, she said quietly, you look like you. Frank looked up and smiled. That's because I am. Emily stood in the garage doorway like she wasn't sure if she should step inside or call an ambulance. Her father, this man who hadn't answered half her calls in a year, who'd once told her life was just something to wait out, was hunched over a workbench like the past 10 years hadn't happened. The light overhead flickered gently, casting shadows on his weathered face, and in his hands was something small and buzzing with life. He looked up at her and smiled, and something inside her chest broke a little. Not in pain, but in recognition. You okay? Frank asked, still holding the prototype. Emily stepped inside. The scent of solder, sawdust, and winter hit her in a wave. It smelled like childhood. Like the basement where he used to fix things while she sat on the floor coloring dinosaurs. I'm okay, she said quietly. Are you okay? I think so, he replied. Better than I've been in years. He held out the device, awkwardly shaped, still crude, wrapped in tape with mismatched wires, but humming, vibrating gently when she moved her hand near the sensor. It's a distance sensor, he said. Vibrates when you're too close to something. Crude interface. Cheap parts. But it works. She took it, hesitantly. It vibrated when her hand passed in front of it, then went quiet. She looked up at him. You built this? With some help, he said. Noah, neighbor's grandson, did the modeling. I just wired the guts. Emily blinked. But your vision, not great, he admitted. I use magnifiers and some voice software. But mostly I work by feel now. And memory. She sat on the edge of an old stool and looked around the garage. It was clean. Organized. Energized. The walls lined with neatly labeled bins, some of the labels marked in braille. The floor swept. The tools hung with care. This wasn't the garage of a man fading away. It was the garage of someone building toward something. Why now? She asked. Why suddenly do all this after years of, she trailed off, not wanting to accuse. Frank didn't flinch. After years of waiting to die, you mean? She winced. Dad, he shook his head. It's all right. I was. After your mom passed, I didn't know who I was without her. And then when my eyes started going, it just felt like life was closing in. Like I was being erased. He paused, fingers tracing the edge of the prototype. But then I heard this clip, Musk talking about failure. About how the real danger isn't trying and falling, it's doing nothing. Waiting. Dying while you're still alive. That hit me hard. Emily said nothing. She remembered the way he used to light up when talking about electrical systems, how he'd teach her about polarity and resistance using old Christmas lights. She remembered the years after Mom died, when he barely got off the couch. The calls she stopped making. The guilt she carried. I thought you didn't want help, she said softly. I didn't, he replied. But not because I didn't need it. I was ashamed. I didn't want to be some broken old man to you. She looked at him. You were never broken, Dad. You were just, lost. He nodded. I know. But I think I've been found again. For a long moment, they sat in silence. Just the quiet buzz of the sensor and the slow hum of the heater in the corner. Then she said, "What's next?" Frank looked up. "I want to refine the design. Make it wearable. Smaller. Maybe something with audio feedback too. But I'm no engineer. I can wire, test, tinker. I need someone who can model and scale. And maybe someone who can help get it to people who need it. She raised an eyebrow. You mean, like distribute it? He nodded. Not for profit. Just to give it away. Open source. Free. For people like me who can't afford fancy tech or implants. Emily thought for a moment. You know, I still work in communications at the foundation, right? We partner with accessibility programs all the time. If this thing has real potential, it's crude, he interrupted. But it works. And it's built for people like me, by someone who understands what losing sight really feels like. Emily smiled. Then I think we can do something with it. That night, they had dinner together for the first time in over a year. It was simple, spaghetti with too much garlic, but they laughed. Talked. Caught up. Frank showed her the garage setup, and Emily helped him adjust the labels on a few of the bins so they were easier to read by touch. She stayed late, and when she finally stood to leave, she hesitated. Can I come by again next weekend? Frank looked surprised. Of course. Maybe we could record a little video. Just something for the foundation. Doesn't have to be perfect. Just your story. Frank chuckled. You think people want to hear from a half-blind old man soldering wires in his garage? I think people need to, she said. You're doing what most people think is impossible. Starting over. Creating something. Trying. He didn't respond. Just smiled. After she left, Frank sat in the dark garage for a while, fingers resting lightly on the prototype. The heater ticked in the corner. The sensor buzzed softly. And somewhere deep in his chest, a strange thing happened. He felt hope. Not the fleeting kind. But the kind that plants itself, slow and stubborn. The next few days moved fast. Noah came by after school each afternoon, helping refine the sensor housing and adjusting the motor sensitivity. Emily sent emails to her team and reached out to a contact at a nonprofit that specialized in low-tech accessibility solutions. One morning, Frank recorded a short video using his phone. It was shaky, raw, unpolished. But it was real. He sat at his workbench, holding the device. Hi, he said, my name's Frank. I'm 72 years old. I'm going blind. But I still build things. This is a homemade device that helps detect obstacles using sensors and vibration feedback. It's cheap. Easy to build. And made for people like me who've been told to slow down, sit down, and stay quiet. I'm not an engineer. I'm not a startup. I'm just a guy in a garage who still believes we're never too old to matter. If you're watching this and you think your best years are behind you, don't believe it. You're not done yet. You're just waiting to get started. He sent it to Emily. She sent it to the foundation's social team. By the end of the week, it had 300,000 views. Comments poured in from all over the country. Retired machinists in Iowa. A blind veteran in Arizona. A woman in Pennsylvania who said her father stopped speaking after his vision declined. This gives me hope, she wrote. This makes me believe again. Frank sat in his kitchen and listened to each comment, each voice message Emily forwarded to him. He didn't cry, but his chest felt full. Like someone had finally flipped the breaker back on after years of silence. The next day, a small tech podcast asked to interview him. He said yes. He didn't rehearse. He just told the truth. About the fear. The isolation. The voice of a tech billionaire that somehow reached past age and doubt and sparked something awake. I didn't need to become Elon Musk, Frank said. I just needed to borrow his courage for a minute. The host called it the most inspiring 10 minutes they'd ever aired. Frank didn't hear that part. He was already back in the garage, soldering wires for version 2.0. By the following week, the garage no longer felt like a garage. It felt like a lab, or maybe a launch pad, though smaller, humbler, and draftier. Frank stood in the center of it like an old captain on the bridge of a ship he'd built from memory and stubbornness. The workbench was clean, the sensor prototype now enclosed in a sleek 3D, printed casing courtesy of Noah's final version, and there were now 2 more builds lined up on the pegboard wall, each a slightly improved copy. It was subtle, but unmistakable, evolution. "Looks like you're building an army," Emily said, sipping coffee from a paper cup as she walked through the garage on Saturday morning. "That's the plan," Frank replied, his hands working carefully at the table. He was rewiring the wristband for better battery placement. His fingers weren't fast anymore, but they were sure. "This week, it's an army. Next week, maybe a revolution." She smiled. "A blind tech rebellion led by a retired electrician in Michigan. I'd watch that movie. I'd star in it," he said, grinning. She stepped beside him, pointing to the new design. "These really do look better. You simplified the wiring." "Had to," he said. "Too many wires sticking out, it was like trying to wear an octopus." Emily laughed. "You've got a following now, you know. People asking for build guides, parts lists. One guy from Oregon wants to fly out and meet you." Frank froze mid-solda, blinking behind his tinted lenses. "He what?" "Yeah," she said. "A former Navy engineer. Went blind in his late 50s. Said your story made him dust off his tools. He's been building his own version. Thinks he can help you refine it." Frank set the soldering iron down and exhaled slowly. "I never thought this would reach people like that." "That's the thing," she said. "People don't want perfect. They want possible. You showed them that." The heater kicked on in the corner. The garage filled with warmth and the faint scent of warm plastic and ambition. Frank picked the device up again, turned it over in his palm, felt the vibration motor pulse as he moved it near the wall. The feedback was smoother now. More intuitive. It was working, not just as tech, but as something bigger. A symbol. That afternoon, they sat down to record a follow-up video. This time, Emily helped him set up better lighting and used a real camera from her foundation's media department. Frank wasn't comfortable in front of the lens. But he spoke from the heart. "You don't have to be a genius," he said, holding the latest prototype. "You don't have to be rich, or young, or even fully healthy. You just have to care. You have to believe that the second half of your life can still be the beginning of something." The video ended with a close-up of the device activating, buzzing gently in Frank's hand, like a heartbeat. They posted it to the Foundation's YouTube channel. It hit 2 million views in 4 days. And that's when the flood really started. Emails from people who were completely blind, partially sighted, mobility impaired, or just afraid of losing control of their lives. Men in their 60s and 70s writing paragraphs about lost confidence and rediscovered curiosity. Women who'd been caregivers their whole lives, now finally asking, "What about me?" One message stood out. It was from a woman named Gloria in Tulsa. She was 68, totally blind, and had built the prototype using Frank's video. She wrote, "I used to think the world didn't care about people like me anymore. But then I saw your hands working on something for us. And suddenly I didn't feel forgotten." Frank read the message 3 times. Then again. Then once more. He didn't reply. He couldn't find the words. But he printed it out and pinned it on the wall next to the workbench. Under it, he wrote in thick marker. "Build for the forgotten." That became the mission. Not to start a company, not to sell, not to scale. But to reach the people who needed reminding that they mattered. Noah started calling it the Frank effect. The local paper caught wind and ran a story. Retired electrician builds hope from a garage. NPR called next. A 5-minute segment aired nationally. Then came the emails from small-town rehab centers, senior communities, and VA hospitals. They didn't want products, they wanted plans. Blueprints. Something they could build together. Frank didn't sleep much that week. Not out of stress, but drive. He and Noah spent long nights building out a full PDF guide, simple, accessible, step-by-step with diagrams and QR codes linking to demo videos. Emily's foundation helped translate it into Spanish and Braille-compatible formats. Then, Frank recorded an audio walkthrough for users who couldn't see a screen at all. By the end of the month, over 30,000 people had downloaded it. Frank's name began to show up in tech circles he'd never imagined. A young YouTuber in India did a breakdown of the design. A team of engineering students in Ohio asked to do a capstone project improving the concept. A non-profit in Germany offered to fund parts kits for low-income builders. One night, as Frank sat in his chair by the window, holding a warm mug of tea, he thought about Rosie. "You'd laugh at all this," he whispered. "Me, a public figure. You always said I should do something with my hands. I wish you could see it." He paused. "Then again, maybe you do." He looked out at the dark yard, at the old maple tree standing guard in the distance. It didn't look different. But he did. He stood up, slowly but with strength, and walked to the garage again. He didn't have a new idea tonight. Didn't need one. He just wanted to be near the work. Near the thing that reminded him he still had something to give. The next morning, Emily showed him an email that stopped him cold. It was from Neuralink's Community Outreach Coordinator. "Mr. Delaney," it began, "Elon Musk recently came across your story. He was inspired by your resilience and innovation. We'd like to invite you to visit our R&D campus in Texas to meet the team and see how individuals like yourself are shaping the future of assistive technology." Frank read it twice, then turned to Emily. "This is real." "Very real," she said, barely containing her smile. He blinked, stunned. "They want me to visit." "They want to learn from you," she said. "You built something they didn't see coming. A movement. A message." Frank didn't speak for a moment. His throat tightened. "I'm just a guy with a few tools and a half-broken body. And a heart that refused to quit," she said. "That's exactly what they need." A week later, Frank packed a small bag and flew to Texas for the first time in his life. The airport overwhelmed him, noise, lights, strangers, but Emily traveled with him, and every step of the way, he clutched the prototype in his pocket like a talisman. When they arrived at the Neuralink campus, Frank half expected it to feel like walking into a spaceship. But instead, it felt strangely familiar. Engineers in hoodies, wires on tables, someone eating takeout in a corner while tweaking a circuit board. He felt at home. They gave him a tour. Showed him early models of their visual cortex interface, years from public use, but promising. They listened as he explained his process. His philosophy. They asked questions. Took notes. At one point, one of the engineers looked at him and said, "What you built, Frank, wasn't just a device. It was permission. For a whole generation." That night, as he lay in a hotel bed hundreds of miles from his quiet Michigan town, Frank stared at the ceiling and whispered to himself, "This isn't the end. It never was. It's just the middle." Frank woke at dawn, before the light could creep through the blinds, with an unfamiliar thrum of excitement in his chest. The hotel room was sterile and unfamiliar, yet his garage felt impossibly close inside his mind. He pocketed the prototype in his coat, careful not to break the fragile wiring. Neuralink's campus lay ahead, miles of polished floors and high-tech labs, but the journey that mattered was already underway in his heart. He followed Emily through corridors humming with quiet urgency, engineers discussing signal delay, a technician calibrating sensors, interns charging circuit boards. Everything looked like Star Trek. He felt out of place until he realized he didn't belong there because he wasn't supposed to belong there. He wasn't elite. He was earnest, a stubborn spark. When they entered a conference room, he saw Neuralink team members, some young, some middle-aged, gathered around a table, leaning in as Emily introduced him. His heart thudded. He stood at the edge, feeling decades of invisibility slide off. Then one of the engineers stepped forward. "Mr. Delaney, thank you," she said. "Your project reached more people in a month than many research papers manage in a year." He blinked, mouth dry. The room was silent except for the hum of machines in the hallway. "I'm just a guy in a garage," he croaked. "That's exactly why you matter," she said. "Stories change us." They gave him a tour. They showed him early brain-computer interface prototypes, arrays of electrodes thinner than a human hair, surgical robots, screens filled with brainwave signals glowing like tiny constellations. He felt dizzy. Then they asked him to share. His turn. He cleared his throat and put the prototype down gently. "I didn't come with qualifications," he said. "Just a voice saying failure is an option, and a refusal to stop being useful. I built something cheap, resilient, and I built it for the forgotten." He told them about Gloria in Tulsa. The Navy engineer from Oregon. Noah's 3D casing. Emily's foundation videos. How something small could feel like an awakening. The room sat quietly, absorbing. Then the chief outreach coordinator, Emily's counterpart, spoke. "Elon saw the segment. He asked us to meet you because he believes real innovation doesn't always come from labs. Sometimes it comes from a garage." Frank's heart stopped. For a moment, he couldn't breathe. He watched. Not just watched, the coordinator said. He was moved. Frank closed his eyes. He thought of Rosie. Thought of wiring speakers, of the coffee spill, of doubt. He thought of Elon's voice, a spark that traveled across years and miles and decades of silence, and woke something inside him that refused to stay down. On the tour out, they visited labs where engineers were testing sensors with robotic limbs, and later, where a doctor demonstrated how signals could stimulate hearing regions of the brain, restoring sound where ears had long failed. Elon Musk had recently said there was a clear path to restoring hearing even in people deaf from birth. Frank thought about how technology could rebuild senses, or belief. That evening, they held a small reception for Frank. He stood surrounded by people who built chips, coded algorithms, processed ethics statements, people he never breathed close to before. And he realized he belonged. Not because of his credentials, but because of his courage. One of the engineers handed him a glass of water. He held it like a trophy. A journalist from the facility asked if he'd record a message to Elon. He looked down at the prototype, wires and all. Took a breath. Held the device to his chest. And spoke, into a camera he couldn't see through. "Mr. Musk, sir, I'm just a retired electrician who went dark. But your voice lit a spark inside me. I routed it through this little piece of junk and reached thousands of people who needed it. You didn't save me, but you gave me permission to start again. We're not done yet." He stopped. And in that moment, something shifted. It wasn't about validation. It was about connection. Elon Musk, an idea, a voice, a spark, had given him that most precious gift, a chance to matter again. The next morning, Frank returned home. His sight hadn't improved. The world was still gray and smeared. But the world inside him glowed. The garage greeted him with familiarity. Noah was there, building a second prototype. Emily had prepared a stack of packages, DIY kits, parts lists, braille guides, for organizations across the country. Frank walked over, placed the prototype gently on the table, and said, "Let's get back to work." And they did. They didn't need applause. Just belief. Just one more spark. And sometimes that's enough to ignite a future. Frank woke before dawn in the small Michigan bedroom he still called his own, though the dream of tension and warmth from the garage lingered in his bones. The world outside was still gray and blurred, his blinds closed to ease the strain, but inside, something flickered awake. He sat on the edge of the bed, fingers tracing the worn quilt, Rosie's handiwork, still soft with her scent, and a slow wave of quiet determination rose. He swung his legs over the side and stood, old bones greeting him with grumbles and aches, a morning orchestra he'd learned to play. He reached for his coat and the prototype nestled safely inside, a well-worn talisman. Today would not be another ordinary Saturday. He felt it in his chest. His daughter, Emily, had a plan. Something bigger than videos and downloads. She wanted him to present the device, his device, at a regional conference on assistive tech, just outside Detroit. Nothing fancy. A community center. No big name. Just people with vision loss, caregivers, a few nonprofits and churches. But to Frank, it felt like the cusp of something new. He walked to the garage, lighting the overhead light even though he couldn't see it clearly. The workspace was alive with parts and papers, labeled bins, the faint hum of chargers. Noah would be here soon, his voice soft behind him. Morning, Captain. Frank smiled. Let's get this ready. They spent the next few hours preparing. Noah 3D printed badge holders for attendees, Emily printed Braille directory cards, and Frank carefully tested the wristbands, making sure the buzzers were responsive, the wiring secure. He held one prototype in his palm, feeling its weight. A weight that once would have felt burdensome, now felt like purpose. He packed everything into a worn duffel. Spare motors, sensors, printed guides, audio walk-through files on a USB drive. Emily arrived with coffee, for Frank, black with 2 sugars, like he liked, and for Noah, a hot chocolate he complained was too sweet but drank anyway. They loaded the car, and the drive to Detroit snapped into rush-hour chaos, taillights, horns, exhaust. For a moment, Frank pressed his hand to the window, pushing the familiarity aside, breathing the stale city air. At the conference center, they set up a modest booth, a table with prototypes, flyers, and a small screen looping Frank's video. He watched from the side as a woman with a white cane reached out, touching it, smiling with surprise. "You made this?" she asked quietly. "I did." That answer felt honest, powerful. Presentation time came. Frank stood at a mic in a circle of folding chairs, mostly full. Some people held canes, others sat in hearing aid devices, some leaned in, curious. He cleared his throat. "I'm Frank. I'm 72, and I'm going blind. But I still build." There were gentle nods. He told them about the coffee spill, Rosie's memory, Elon Musk's voice that broke 3 years of quiet. About building the speaker. About being forgotten. About Noah and Emily, and Gloria in Tulsa, and the Navy engineer in Oregon. He showed them the prototype, slipped it on a volunteer's wrist. As the woman walked, it buzzed gently when she came close to the table. She laughed, "That's real." Frank's throat tightened. He spoke again, "Innovation doesn't always come from labs. Sometimes it comes from garages. Sometimes it starts with one person refusing to say, 'I'm too old.'" Tears glistened on a few cheeks, a silence settled, thick and full of recognition. That afternoon, after the speeches ended, people gathered. A man in his 80s, totally blind, asked quietly, "Can I build one?" Frank took his hand. "Yes, you can." Another woman, a caregiver, said, "My husband used to build model trains. Now he doesn't. But this might bring him back." Frank nodded. Next came questions, not about specs, but about how to keep going. "How do you stay motivated?" someone asked. He smiled softly, remembering Elon's words, "Failure is an option here. If things are not failing, "You are not innovating enough." He answered, "You don't wait for perfection. You just keep trying. And you don't do it for the applause. You do it because there's still something inside you that wants to matter." They packed up as the room cleared, the rest of the team tired but glowing. Emily drove quietly, Frank thinking about Rosie's laugh, Emily's cautious smile, Noah's steady hands. He pulled the prototype from the bag and held it to his chest. Not seeing, but feeling. Frank returned from Detroit to his Michigan town with the same quiet determination that had started this journey. The garage welcomed him like an old friend, dust settled in the corners, but the space felt warmer, fuller, ready for whatever came next. Emily and Noah were there when he walked in. "How was it?" Noah asked. "Electric," Frank said. "Like the first day all over again." He held up the prototype, still working, still humming like a heartbeat. That night, after they cleaned up, Frank couldn't sleep. He lay awake thinking about the questions people asked at the conference, not about technical specs or feasibility, but about staying alive, staying whole, staying curious when the world told you to settle. And he realized something. It wasn't enough to just build a device. He wanted more. He wanted to build a community. A network of people who believed late-life reinvention wasn't just possible but necessary. He sat up, shoved aside Rosie's old quilt, and found his phone. He sent a message to Emily, "What if we started a meet-up? Monthly live streams? A group for late-blooming inventors?" She responded almost immediately, already thinking about it. "Let's plan." So they started with a live stream. Frank sat in the garage, surrounded by tools, holding the prototype. A gentle studio mic captured his words. "Welcome to the first ever, still building, live stream," he said, voice steady. "I'm Frank Delaney. I'm 72. I'm going blind. But I'm still building." Cameras rolled, comments streamed in from coast to coast. From retirees in Florida, from former engineers in rural Pennsylvania, from caregivers up in Wisconsin, they shared stories. That live stream turned into 2, then 4. Each featured a guest. Gloria from Tulsa shared how the device helped her walk her dog again. The Navy engineer from Oregon showed how he adapted the code for better beep patterns. A young maker from Ohio revealed a solar power add-on. With each stream, Frank's world stretched wider. But something also changed inside him. He wasn't just building hardware anymore. He was building hope. Then, one night, as he was recording a short demonstration video with Emily, his phone pinged. It was an email from a school district in rural Minnesota. "Can you help train our tech ed teachers to build these with students?" He stared. A teacher from Minnesota, students building for the elderly. He blinked into the lens and said, "You bet." And so it expanded. What started as a live stream grew into weekly sessions. Emily helped create a lesson plan, Noah made printable worksheets. They called it Project Lightback, a kids and community program encouraging schools, community centers, and even living rooms to build the device together. One afternoon, a parcel arrived, a stack of kits from a nonprofit funded by Emily's foundation. Inside were sensors, buzzers, batteries, all pre-sorted, labeled, ready to be assembled alongside the Lightback guide. Frank examined them, stunned. His invention had become a kit. A tool. A means. A message. One evening, he sat on his porch with Emily, listening to crickets and distant traffic hum. "Never thought I'd be part of something like this," Frank said quietly. "I thought my story would just fade." Emily smiled. "You proved otherwise." Frank corrected, smiling at her and then looking out at the night sky. "Not me. We." The Lightback program ramped up. They sent kits to schools in Maine and Montana. A library in Kansas hosted a build day. A rehab center in California used the plans to create mobility aid projects with their senior clients. Frank received pictures of grinning hands, young and old, working together. He printed them and taped them along the wall over the workbench, faces and hands, connection and creation. It became a gallery of belonging. Then came the letter, typed neatly, from a prominent tech magazine: "We'd like to feature your project in a full article. Can we fly you, any expenses paid, to New York City for an interview and a demo?" Frank held the letter with trembling fingers. He hadn't left Michigan since his trip to Texas. New York felt immense. But so did purpose. "I want to do it," he told Emily, voice low but sure. "I want to go. I want to say, we're still building." A few weeks later, Frank found himself in a glass studio, downtown Manhattan, being interviewed by a reporter in a blazer who had clearly practiced her inspirational tone before. But Frank wasn't performing. He held the prototype in his palm, let it buzz, and said plainly, "This is for the forgotten. My hope is that it reminds us all that it's never too late to light up the world again." That video went viral. Frank's face filled phones across the country. He got calls, vacationers and vets, teachers and the newly retired. Many told him they'd lost their spark, then found it again in a garage in Michigan. He thought of Rosie's quilt, the smell of solder, Elon's voice still echoing. Then came an email from Neuralink's outreach team: "Would you be interested in joining our design advisory board? Your story is part of the future of assistive innovation." Frank stared. His breath caught. Then he smiled. "Yeah," he whispered. "Yeah, I am." The chapter ends unabrasive but full of momentum. Frank, retired electrician with failing sight, has not only built a device, he has built a community, a movement, a reminder that it's never too late for purpose. And the world is watching, not because he's a tech genius, but because he dared to build in the dark and invited others to help him see again. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The winter in Michigan was quiet, blanketing the small town in thick white snow, muffling the familiar sounds of morning traffic and distant laughter. Frank sat by the window, a steaming cup of coffee warming his hands, eyes tracing the falling flakes. The world outside was cold and muted, but inside, his mind was a firestorm of new ideas and questions. The invitation to join Neuralink's design advisory board had come just weeks before. A surreal moment for a man who, less than a year ago, doubted whether he still had anything left to offer. He'd traveled to their headquarters again, this time as a contributor, not just a visitor. The sleek, humming facility had a different energy now, no longer intimidating but inspiring. Young engineers and seasoned scientists buzzed around projects that felt like science fiction. He marveled at the prototypes, the data streams, the promise of restoring senses thought lost forever. But the meetings were tough. Complex terminology flew over his head. He often felt like an outsider, the older man in a sea of 20-somethings who had never known a world without smartphones or electric cars. Yet, he listened, asked questions, and shared stories, the real stories, the human ones, the ones that data couldn't capture. One day, Elon Musk himself stopped by the room. Frank's breath caught. Elon's presence was electric, a mix of sharp intellect and infectious enthusiasm. "Frank, your project is a brilliant example of what we're missing in tech, heart and grit," Elon said, nodding thoughtfully. "Keep pushing boundaries. Age, failure, they're just data points. Not limits." The words settled deep inside Frank. In that moment, he felt not invisible, but invaluable. The advisory role brought new purpose, but it also challenged him to think bigger. Neuralink's prototypes were groundbreaking, but they were complex and costly. Frank wanted his invention to stay accessible, to remain a bridge for those like him who needed simple, affordable tools. He proposed a hybrid model, merging Neuralink's advanced technology with his DIY approach. The team was intrigued. Frank spent hours sketching new ideas, consulting engineers, and learning about microchips and wireless protocols. At home, Emily and Noah helped translate the jargon into practical steps. Their garage, once cluttered with parts and memories, transformed into a mini-lab. Filled with printed schematics, soldering irons, and glowing screens. Weeks turned to months. Frank's vision evolved into a sleek wristband prototype that combined Neuralink's microsensors with his tactile feedback system. It could not restore sight, but it translated obstacles and distances into gentle vibrations, allowing wearers to navigate more confidently. On one chilly spring morning, Frank stood outside the rehab center where Gloria had started walking again months ago. He handed her the new wristband. She slipped it on, eyes bright behind thick glasses, and took tentative steps. The device buzzed softly as she approached a curb, guiding her safely down. "It's like a second set of eyes," she whispered. Frank felt a lump in his throat. Moments like this made every late night, every frustration, worth it. The community they built through Project Lightback grew stronger. Schools, rehab centers, and individuals sent back feedback, ideas, and new challenges. Frank and Emily organized monthly virtual meetings, sharing successes and troubleshooting problems. Noah created tutorial videos that made assembly easier for people with no tech background. One evening, after a long day of calls and emails, Frank sat with Emily in the living room, watching a video from a teacher in rural Kansas. Her students, mostly seniors, had built the wristbands and were testing them outdoors, laughing and encouraging each other. "Look at that," Frank said softly. "We're really making a difference." Emily smiled. "You've built more than a device, Dad. You've built a family." But change never came without setbacks. A shipment of components was delayed, threatening their next build session. A software update caused unexpected glitches. Frank's vision worsened unexpectedly one day, plunging him into frustration and fear. "Is this it?" he wondered bitterly. "Have I reached my limit?" In those moments, he returned to Elon's words, the voice that had ignited his courage: "When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor." He reminded himself that failure was part of the process, not the end. With Emily and Noah by his side, he pushed through. They troubleshot, redesigned, adapted. The community rallied too, offering support and encouragement. Months later, at a national conference on assistive technologies, Frank was invited to speak alongside leading innovators. He took the stage, the buzz of the crowd fading into silence as he began. "I'm not a scientist or a billionaire," he said, voice steady but warm. "I'm a man who refused to let age or blindness define him. This device is not just technology, it's hope. It's a reminder that no matter the setbacks, we can build new futures." The applause was long and sincere. Backstage, a young engineer approached him with tears in her eyes. "You've inspired me," she said. "To keep pushing, to never give up." Frank smiled, remembering his own journey. From the coffee spill to Elon's voice, from garage experiments to global connections, he had come full circle. He wasn't just building a device anymore, he was building a legacy. One evening, as the sun set over the snowy town, Frank stood on his porch, hands warm in his coat pockets, eyes lifting to the horizon. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in years, it felt wide open. He whispered to the wind, "I was never too old. I was just waiting to start again." Frank's phone buzzed softly as he sat at the kitchen table, the morning sun casting long streaks across the faded linoleum. It was a message from Emily, big news. "Can you call?" His heart skipped. Was this another challenge or a breakthrough? He dialed quickly, hearing her excited voice almost immediately. "Dad, the local news wants to do a feature on you and Project Lightback. They heard about the conference and want to film a story. Can you believe it?" Frank smiled, feeling the familiar flutter of nerves mixed with pride. "I think I can manage that." The crew arrived a few days later, setting up cameras in the garage where so many ideas had been born. Frank showed them the prototype, demonstrated how it worked, and shared pieces of his story, how he had lost sight but not hope, how Elon Musk's words had ignited a spark, how a simple idea could ripple across communities. The cameraman followed him outside, capturing the snow-covered street, the house where Rosie had lived, the porch where Frank had spent so many quiet evenings reflecting. "Your story is inspiring, Frank," the reporter said. "What keeps you going?" He looked out at the horizon, where the sky was slowly lightening. "I think it's knowing I'm not alone. That even when the world feels like it's moving too fast, there's room for someone like me to keep building, to keep dreaming." The story aired that evening, reaching viewers across the state. Calls and emails poured in, people sharing their own stories of loss, resilience, and reinvention. Among them was a letter from a man named George, a retired schoolteacher who had recently lost his wife and struggled with blindness himself. "Your story gave me hope," George wrote. "I want to learn how to build one of your devices. Maybe together, we can help others like us." Frank printed the letter and pinned it to the garage wall, letting the words sink in. The idea of helping George and others like him sparked a new plan. Emily suggested hosting workshops, hands-on sessions where people could come, learn, build, and share. Noah designed accessible instruction manuals, with large print and braille. Soon, the garage became a hub of activity. On Saturdays, neighbors, strangers, and old friends gathered. Some had lost sight, others helped loved ones, all were united by a common purpose. Frank watched as hands, young and old, worked side by side, soldering wires, fitting sensors, testing vibrations. The air buzzed with laughter, stories, and the steady rhythm of creation. One afternoon, as Frank helped a young woman named Linda connect a circuit, she confided, "I was afraid I'd never do anything meaningful again after my diagnosis. But being here, it's like I've found a new family." He squeezed her hand gently. "You're exactly where you need to be." The workshops flourished, catching the attention of local organizations and health centers. Donations and grants arrived, enabling them to expand, buy more materials, host more sessions, reach more people. Frank's once quiet town buzzed with renewed energy, a beacon for those searching for hope. Yet amid the growth, Frank never lost sight of the struggles. Some days, his vision dimmed so much that the familiar shapes of tools and faces blurred into shadows. Frustration threatened to overwhelm him, but he learned to lean on his team and community. Emily often reminded him, "We're building this together, Dad. You're not alone." On a cold evening, as snowflakes danced outside the window, Frank sat with a photo album, tracing the faded pictures of his younger self with Rosie, the kids, old friends. He whispered, "I thought I was done. That my time had passed." He closed the book and looked around at the buzzing workshop, the new friends, the glowing screens. But maybe this is just the beginning. The story of a man who once felt left behind now illuminated the lives of others. Frank's journey was no longer just about one invention, but a movement, proof that age and loss did not mean the end, but the start of something new. And as the lights in the garage flickered softly, Frank felt a quiet joy. A new chapter unfolding with every heartbeat. The night before the big presentation at the National Innovation Summit, Frank sat alone in his dimly lit garage. Outside, the stars blinked cold and distant, a reminder of the vastness beyond this small Michigan town. The soft hum of the prototype resting on the workbench filled the silence, a gentle pulse that matched the steady beat of his heart. Months of hard work, setbacks, triumphs, and hope had led him here. The device, now refined and redesigned, was no longer just a tool for navigation, it was a symbol of possibility. Frank's fingers trembled slightly as he lifted the wristband, feeling the smooth contours beneath his skin. He thought of the journey, of Rosie's warm smile from faded photographs, of Emily and Noah's unwavering support, of Elon Musk's challenge to push beyond limits. Doubts crept in like winter shadows. Was he truly ready? Could a man his age, half-blind and tired, stand in front of a crowd of innovators and skeptics and make them see not just his invention, but the spirit behind it? He closed his eyes, recalling a phrase Elon had once said during a conference livestream: "Great things are never done by one person. They're done by a team of people who refuse to quit." Frank took a deep breath. He wasn't alone. The next morning, the convention center buzzed with energy, a swirling mix of tech enthusiasts, investors, reporters, and dreamers. The air smelled of fresh coffee, polished floors, and nervous anticipation. Frank, in his worn jacket and sturdy boots, felt like a fish out of water amid the polished suits and cutting-edge gadgets. Emily, always his rock, gave him a reassuring smile. "You've got this." The stage was vast, lit by bright spotlights that made the audience seem like a sea of shadows. Frank adjusted his microphone, the familiar hum of the crowd filling his ears. When his name was called, he stepped forward with a steady gait, the wristband clasped firmly in his hand. "Good morning," he began, voice warm and steady despite the flutter inside. "I'm Frank Delaney, a 73-year-old who was told he'd lost his chance to make a difference. But I'm here to tell you that it's never too late to build, to create, to inspire." He showed the wristband, its sleek design glowing softly under the lights. "This device is the result of a journey. One filled with loss, hope, and the unyielding belief that technology should serve everyone, no matter their age or ability." As he demonstrated how the wristband translated obstacles into gentle vibrations, the crowd leaned in, captivated not just by the tech but by the story woven through each word. Frank shared stories of Gloria learning to walk again, of George building his first device alongside strangers who became friends, of students and seniors breaking barriers together. The presentation wasn't just about innovation, it was about human connection, resilience, and the refusal to fade away quietly. When he finished, the room erupted in applause. Frank's eyes scanned the crowd, catching the sparkle of recognition in the faces of young engineers, seasoned inventors, and even a few skeptics turned believers. Backstage, Elon Musk greeted him with a nod and a rare smile. "You did more than present a device," Elon said. "You reminded us all what it means to keep pushing forward." The days that followed were a whirlwind. Interviews, invitations to speak at conferences, and offers to collaborate flooded Frank's inbox. But amid the excitement, he remained grounded. His focus was clear: to keep Project Lightback accessible, to empower those who had been told they were too old or too broken to matter. Back in Michigan, the garage pulsed with renewed energy. Plans for a nationwide workshop tour took shape. Schools, libraries, and rehab centers clamored to join the movement. Frank's vision expanded beyond technology; it was about reclaiming dignity, independence, and joy. One afternoon, as spring blossomed outside, Frank and Emily visited a community center hosting a Lightback workshop. The room buzzed with conversation and concentration. Hands, some wrinkled, some young, worked together, soldering, assembling, testing. A woman with a gentle smile approached Frank, holding up a newly completed wristband. "This is my first invention," she said softly. "I thought my best days were behind me, but here I am." Frank's eyes misted. "You're proof that it's never too late." That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Frank sat on his porch, a soft breeze rustling the budding leaves. He pulled out his journal, fingers tracing the worn pages filled with sketches, ideas, and reflections. Writing came slowly now, but each word held weight. He penned a message to the growing community: we are more than our limitations. We are builders, dreamers, and doers at every age. Let this journey remind us that the future is always within reach, no matter where we start. Closing the journal, Frank gazed up at the stars again. The journey was far from over. But for the first time in a long time, the night sky felt full of promise, a vast, open space for new beginnings. And Frank Delaney was ready to keep building, no matter what came next. The call came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Frank was sitting by the window, the patter of raindrops against the glass blending with the distant hum of the highway. Emily was nearby, helping Noah with a school project, when Frank's phone buzzed insistently. He picked it up, squinting at the unknown number. "Hello." His voice was cautious but curious. On the other end was a woman with a warm but urgent tone. "Mr. Delaney. This is Dr. Elena Martinez from the National Institute on Aging. We've been following your work with Project Lightback, and we're impressed. We'd like to discuss a potential collaboration." Frank blinked, heart racing. A collaboration with a national institute? This was beyond anything he had dared imagine. The conversation unfolded quickly, with Dr. Martinez explaining how their research on neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to adapt and heal, aligned perfectly with the goals of his invention. Together, they could explore new ways to help blind and visually impaired seniors regain a sense of independence through sensory substitution and brain-machine interfaces. Over the next few weeks, Frank found himself navigating a new world of scientific jargon, research protocols, and academic meetings. It was intimidating but invigorating. He leaned on Emily and Noah to help him make sense of dense reports and technical language. Their garage now held not only the tools for building prototypes but also stacks of research papers and a whiteboard filled with notes from conference calls. One late night, Frank sat staring at a complex diagram illustrating neural pathways. The lines twisted and crossed like a map of a foreign city. He rubbed his tired eyes and whispered, "How do you rebuild what's been lost?" But Dr. Martinez had reminded him that the brain was more resilient than most realized. "It's not just about restoring sight," she had said. "It's about teaching the brain new ways to interpret signals." Inspired by this, Frank proposed an ambitious idea. Combining Project Lightback's tactile feedback system with Neuralink's brain interface to create a device that could translate spatial information directly into the brain, bypassing damaged optic nerves. The team was excited but cautious. It was uncharted territory. Frank's health sometimes made progress slow, but each small step was a victory. One afternoon, during a lab visit, Frank met George in person, the retired teacher who had first reached out months earlier. George was using a prototype that vibrated more precisely, guiding his cane-free steps through a busy park. His face lit up with joy and determination. "I never thought I'd walk like this again," he said. "You gave me back a part of my life." Frank felt a deep sense of purpose. It was more than invention, it was redemption. As spring turned to summer, the collaboration deepened. Dr. Martinez's team developed software that processed visual data into patterns of electrical pulses. Frank's team refined the wristband sensors and haptic motors. Neuralink provided access to experimental implants designed to interface with the visual cortex. Together, they envisioned a future where blindness would no longer mean darkness but a different kind of seeing, one where the mind learned to translate new signals into meaningful perception. But the path was fraught with challenges. Technical glitches, regulatory hurdles, and funding constraints threatened to stall progress. Frank's vision wavered one evening when a critical prototype failed during a demonstration. Frustration welled up, mixing with exhaustion. He wanted to quit, to retreat to the quiet solitude of his old life. Yet, Elon Musk's words echoed again in his mind, "Persistence is the key. When others stop, you keep going." With renewed resolve, Frank and his team tackled each problem, learning and adapting. They hosted weekly meetings where failures were dissected honestly, and new ideas sparked from collective wisdom. The community around Project Lightback grew stronger, united by a shared belief in the power of human innovation and resilience. One particularly warm summer evening, Frank stood at a local festival, watching families and friends celebrate under strings of twinkling lights. A young woman approached, wearing a Lightback wristband. "Mr. Delaney," she said, eyes shining. "Your invention changed my life. I'm studying engineering now because of you." Tears pricked Frank's eyes. This was why he kept going, because the ripple of one small idea could ignite countless futures. That night, Under the vast canopy of stars, Frank realized something profound. His journey was not just about restoring sight or overcoming age, it was about reigniting hope in every soul willing to dream again. The past, with its losses and regrets, no longer defined him. Instead, the future beckoned, bright and boundless, waiting for him to keep building, keep believing. The early morning sun filtered through the cracked blinds of Frank's bedroom, casting soft golden beams on the worn wooden floor. Today wasn't just any day, it was the day Frank and the team were to test their latest breakthrough, an experimental interface that could potentially connect the lightback device directly to the brain, translating spatial awareness into neural impulses. The culmination of months of relentless work, failures, and tiny victories. Frank moved slowly but deliberately, the familiar ache in his joints a steady reminder of time's passage. Emily was already in the kitchen, preparing coffee and humming quietly, a comforting background rhythm. Noah was pacing near the garage entrance, clutching his laptop, eyes bright with anticipation. "Ready?" Emily asked softly, handing Frank a cup. He nodded, swallowing nerves with the bitter warmth. The team gathered in the garage, now transformed into a makeshift lab. Computers hummed, wires snaked across tables, and monitors flickered with streams of data. Dr. Martinez and her researchers had flown in early to supervise the test, their presence a reminder of how far this project had traveled from its humble beginnings. Frank sat down carefully as the lead scientist prepared the neural interface. A slim, flexible device designed to gently rest against his scalp, sending pulses meant to simulate visual input. The machine beeped, calibrating. "This might feel strange at first," Dr. Martinez said kindly. "We'll take it slow." Frank closed his eyes, focusing on breathing, letting memories of Elon Musk's words echo, "Don't fear failure. Fear being in the exact same place next year as you are today." Then the test began. Soft patterns of sensation flickered beneath his skin, unfamiliar yet oddly rhythmic. The team watched monitors as his brain activity responded to the stimuli. Slowly, Frank's face shifted, from confusion to tentative recognition. He opened his eyes, blinking as if adjusting to a new world. "It's like shapes," he murmured. "Moving shapes." For the first time in years, Frank wasn't just navigating the world by memory or touch, he was sensing it anew, in a way that felt like a whisper of sight. The breakthrough was fragile but electric. A promise that technology and human spirit could weave miracles together. Over the following weeks, the tests grew longer and more complex. Frank learned to interpret the new sensations, his brain rewiring itself in surprising ways. Emily and Noah documented every moment, every reaction, building a roadmap for others who would follow. The local news caught wind of the progress, and soon, the garage was no longer just a lab, it was a symbol of hope broadcast to thousands. One afternoon, Frank received a call that would forever change the trajectory of Project Lightback. A representative from a major tech foundation expressed interest in funding their next phase, including trials with a wider group of seniors suffering from vision loss. The news sent waves of excitement and responsibility crashing through the team. With more resources came greater scrutiny, and greater expectations. But Frank was ready. The team expanded, bringing in more engineers, therapists, and users. Workshops evolved into research centers. The once small garage became a hub of innovation and healing. Despite the whirlwind, Frank remained grounded by the faces of those who had inspired him, Gloria's smile after her first steps, George's steady strides in the park, Linda's hopeful eyes. One evening, as summer melted into fall, Frank sat with Emily on the porch, watching the leaves turn fiery red and gold. "Do you remember when I was just spilling coffee and feeling like I was done?" he asked quietly. Emily smiled, squeezing his hand. "I do. And look at you now." Frank laughed softly, a sound full of wonder and gratitude. "It's strange. I thought losing my sight meant losing everything. But it was just the start of seeing differently." Their conversation was interrupted by Noah, who came running out with a tablet. "Dad, you need to see this." On the screen was a video sent by a participant from a rural workshop, a blind woman navigating a busy farmer's market with the lightback wristband and new neural interface prototype. Her face was radiant, her confidence inspiring. Frank's eyes filled with tears. "We're really doing it," he whispered. But amid the triumphs, Frank faced moments of vulnerability. Fatigue sometimes clouded his mind, pain reminded him he was still human, still fragile. Yet, in those moments, the community rallied. Messages from participants, emails from families, calls from friends, they all reinforced a simple truth: he mattered, and so did the work. One chilly morning, Frank received a letter from a stranger named James, a man in his 70s who had lost his sight in a car accident decades ago and had given up hope. James wrote of watching the news story and deciding to try again, to believe in possibility. "Your journey has rekindled a light inside me," he wrote. "I'm ready to build my own path forward." The letter was pinned next to George's on the garage wall, reminders that each story was a thread in a larger tapestry. As autumn deepened, Frank prepared for another milestone, presenting the latest findings at an international conference. Standing backstage, he felt the weight of years, the push of dreams, and the quiet strength born from struggle. When his turn came, Frank stepped into the spotlight, sharing not only data but the heart behind it. "This isn't just about restoring sight," he told the audience. "It's about redefining what it means to live fully at any age. We are not done. We are just beginning." The applause was thunderous. Afterward, Elon Musk approached him once again, this time with a knowing smile. "Frank, you embody what I hoped for when I said age is just a number. Keep leading. The future needs people like you." Frank nodded, feeling the fire inside grow even brighter. That night, alone in his room, Frank looked out at the stars. The journey had transformed him, revealing a truth deeper than technology or fame, that hope, persistence, and community could remake lives. And as the first snow of winter whispered against the windowpane, Frank felt ready to keep building, keep dreaming, because the new dawn was just ahead. Winter had settled over the small Michigan town, wrapping the streets in a quiet blanket of snow that muffled sounds and softened the edges of everyday life. Frank sat by the window in his favorite chair, a thick quilt draped over his knees, watching the flakes drift lazily down. The garage, now transformed into a buzzing center of innovation and hope, was temporarily closed for the holidays, giving Frank a rare moment of stillness. But even in this quiet, his mind raced with possibilities. The neural interface tests had shown promise, but the next steps were daunting. Scaling the technology, navigating regulatory hurdles, and reaching a wider community of seniors required more than passion, it demanded strategy, resilience, and connection. Emily entered, carrying 2 mugs of tea, her smile a beacon in the muted winter light. "You've been quiet," she observed gently. "Thinking about the next move?" Frank nodded, accepting the warm mug. "I keep wondering, how do we turn this from a spark into a wildfire? How do we make sure no one feels left behind?" Emily sat beside him, her eyes reflecting years of shared dreams and struggles. "By remembering who we're building for. Not just the technology, but the people. Every person who's told it's too late deserves a chance to see new possibilities." Frank smiled, comforted by her words. That evening, Frank drafted a letter to a network of senior centers across the country, inviting them to partner on a pilot program to bring Project Lightback's technology and training to their communities. The response was overwhelming. Calls flooded in from directors eager to offer workshops, testimonials from seniors hungry for change, and volunteers willing to help. One call, in particular, stood out: a woman named Mary from a rural town in Appalachia who had lost her sight in her 60s and long felt invisible. "Your story, it's like you're speaking for people like me," Mary said, voice trembling with hope. "I want to be part of this." The team's next phase was born, a traveling workshop series designed to reach seniors isolated by geography, age, or circumstance. Months of planning followed. Frank, Emily, and Noah organized logistics, sourced funding, and adapted the technology for varied environments. Each workshop was carefully designed to be accessible, engaging, and empowering. When the first workshop launched in a small community center in West Virginia, the room filled with a mix of skepticism and curiosity. Many participants had resigned themselves to their limitations, their stories marked by loss and silence. But as Frank demonstrated the light-back wristband and shared stories of transformation, something shifted. The air grew electric with possibility. Hands that trembled with age learned to connect circuits. Eyes once clouded with doubt sparkled with newfound purpose. Laughter and encouragement filled the space, weaving a tapestry of connection. Mary, now a confident participant, shared her journey. For years, I thought my story was over. But here, I'm starting a new chapter. Each workshop deepened Frank's belief that technology alone wasn't enough, community was the true catalyst for change. He watched as friendships blossomed, support networks formed, and hope took root. Yet, even as the movement grew, Frank faced his own physical and emotional challenges. The winter cold made his joints stiff, and nights were often restless. Moments of self-doubt crept in like shadows. Was he moving too fast? Was his body up to the task? In these moments, he found strength in simple rituals, morning walks with Emily, shared meals with Noah, quiet reflections in his journal. And, always, the words of Elon Musk, when something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor. On a crisp evening during the second workshop in a community hall filled with handmade quilts and pine-scented candles, Frank met a man named Carl. Carl was 72, a former carpenter who had lost his sight to diabetes years ago. He was skeptical at first, doubting a gadget could change a lifetime of struggle. But as he learned to use the wristband and feel the subtle vibrations guiding his steps, Carl's world brightened. "I feel alive again," he said, voice thick with emotion. "Like I'm holding on to my independence." The stories like Carl's reinforced Frank's conviction that age, loss, and isolation were not the end but invitations to reinvent and reconnect. Back in Michigan, the Lightback team expanded their research, developing new features and improving the neural interface's sensitivity. Collaboration with Dr. Martinez's lab continued, pushing the boundaries of what seemed possible. One evening, Frank received an unexpected invitation, a TED Talk. The organizers wanted him to share his journey with a global audience. The prospect was thrilling and terrifying. Speaking in front of thousands, millions watching online, was far beyond his comfort zone. But the opportunity to amplify the message, to inspire countless others, was too important to decline. Weeks of preparation followed, with Emily coaching him through the speech, helping him find his authentic voice. Frank focused not on the technology but on the stories, the failures, the breakthroughs, the people whose lives had changed. The day of the talk arrived on a bright spring afternoon. Standing backstage, Frank's heart pounded. The spotlight felt hot and intimidating, but he drew strength from the journey behind him and the faces of those who believed in the mission. When introduced, he stepped forward and began. "I'm not an inventor or a scientist by training," he said, voice steady but warm. "I'm a man who was told it was too late, that my best days were behind me. But I'm here to tell you that every ending is just the start of something new." He shared the story of Project Lightback, the struggles of blindness, the power of persistence, and the magic of community. The audience listened, rapt. When he demonstrated the wristband and explained the neural interface, applause broke out. Afterwards, Frank was approached by attendees moved to tears, inspired to act, and eager to contribute. The talk went viral, opening doors to new partnerships and funding. Invitations poured in, from universities, hospitals, tech companies, all wanting to be part of the revolution. But Frank remained grounded by the core mission, making sure the technology reached those often forgotten. As spring blossomed fully, Frank found himself back in the garage, surrounded by the hum of creation and the warmth of connection. The journey was far from over, but the light now burned brighter than ever. One quiet night, he wrote in his journal, "I thought I was too old, too broken to matter. But this path has shown me that the spark never dies, it only waits for us to kindle it again." The new invention was more than a device, it was a testament to the human spirit, proof that age, loss, and fear could be transformed into courage, innovation, and hope. And as Frank closed his journal and looked out at the stars, he knew the future was wide open, ready for all who dared to see differently. Spring was in full bloom when Frank received the news that a major medical journal had accepted their research paper on Project Lightback's neural interface. It was a milestone, a validation of years of relentless work and quiet hope. The acceptance letter arrived on a warm April morning, sunlight streaming through the window as Frank held the crisp envelope with trembling hands. Emily and Noah were beside him, sharing the moment's gravity. This recognition was more than academic, it was a bridge to wider acceptance, funding, and new partnerships. The paper detailed not only the technology but the human stories behind it, seniors reclaiming independence, brains rewiring, lives rekindled. It was a message to the world that age was no barrier to transformation. Yet, as the team celebrated, Frank felt a familiar ache, the physical toll of pushing boundaries, the exhaustion of juggling health and ambition. One afternoon, during a particularly grueling test session, Frank's vision blurred, dizziness washing over him. Emily quickly helped him to a chair, concern etched across her face. "You're pushing too hard," she said softly. "We need to pace this." That night, alone with his thoughts, Frank confronted his fears. Was his body a limit? Could he keep leading this charge? The answer came from an unexpected place, Elon Musk's 2020 interview where he said, "It's not about being fearless. It's about embracing the fear and moving forward anyway." Inspired, Frank decided to slow down, not to stop, but to recharge and delegate more. He trusted his team and leaned into collaboration. With renewed focus, Project Lightback expanded its reach. They launched a pilot program at a rehabilitation center in Chicago, where dozens of seniors tested the neural interface over months. The results were encouraging. Many reported improved mobility and confidence. Some described sensations resembling partial sight for the first time in decades. Among them was Ruth, an 80-year-old former artist who had lost her vision to glaucoma. She shared how the device allowed her to feel the world's shapes and inspired her to paint again, using textures and colors she could now sense differently. Her story was a powerful reminder that creativity and purpose were not bound by age or ability. Meanwhile, Noah, now a college student studying biomedical engineering, contributed fresh ideas, bridging generations with innovation and energy. His enthusiasm reminded Frank of the importance of legacy, not just in technology but in inspiring the next wave of thinkers and doers. Yet, not all days were victories. Bureaucratic red tape slowed progress, some participants struggled to adapt, funding remained uncertain. One evening, after a setback with a device malfunction, Frank sat alone in the darkened garage, feeling the weight of uncertainty press down. He reached for a worn notebook where he'd scribbled Elon Musk's quotes. One line caught his eye, "Some people don't like change, but you need to embrace change if the alternative is disaster." That night, Frank made a vow to keep embracing change, no matter how difficult, because the alternative was giving up on a future he believed in. The spring gave way to summer, and Project Lightback hosted its largest workshop yet, a week-long event that brought together seniors, researchers, and advocates. The atmosphere buzzed with energy and hope, a celebration of resilience and innovation. Frank watched as participants shared laughter, triumphs, and tears, united by a shared mission. One memorable moment came when Mary, the woman from Appalachia, stood to speak. Her voice was steady, filled with gratitude and strength. "This project didn't just restore a sense of sight," she said. "It restored my belief in myself." The crowd erupted in applause. As the event closed, Frank found himself standing beneath a sky painted with stars, feeling a profound sense of peace. The journey had been hard, marked by doubt and pain, but also by connection and purpose. He thought about the path ahead, long, uncertain, but illuminated by every life touched. Before leaving the event, Frank received an unexpected visit from a young engineer named Lisa, who had been inspired by his TED Talk. "I want to help make this technology accessible worldwide," she said with quiet determination. "Age or location shouldn't limit anyone's chance to see the world." Frank smiled, seeing in her the same fire that had propelled him forward. Together, they began discussing plans to scale production and improve affordability. Back home, as summer nights stretched long and warm, Frank reflected on how far he'd come. The loss of his own vision once felt like an insurmountable wall, but now it was a gateway to purpose. His story, intertwined with those of countless others, was a testament to the power of hope, innovation, and the human spirit. And in the quiet moments before sleep, he repeated to himself a truth that had become his mantra: "I was never too old. I was just waiting for permission to matter again." The heat of midsummer settled over the town like a heavy blanket, thick with cicada songs and the scent of blooming honeysuckle. Frank woke early, the faint glow of dawn filtering through his curtains, and despite the familiar stiffness in his joints, there was a restless energy inside him. Today marked the launch of Project Lightback's newest initiative, a community-driven program aimed at training local volunteers to become ambassadors for the technology, bridging the gap between invention and everyday life. The idea had come from Lisa, the young engineer who had joined the team with fierce determination and fresh ideas. Her vision was clear: to create a grassroots movement that empowered seniors not just to use the technology but to advocate for themselves and others. Frank found himself both inspired and humbled. He knew that true change required more than devices and data; it demanded connection, trust, and a shared belief in possibility. That morning, the garage was transformed into a classroom buzzing with excitement. Volunteers from all walks of life, retirees, caregivers, students, gathered, eager to learn and contribute. Emily coordinated registration while Noah set up interactive demos on the tables. Frank moved among the group, greeting faces familiar and new, feeling the pulse of community come alive. The day's agenda was ambitious. Workshops covered the basics of the Lightback wristband and neural interface, troubleshooting tips, and most importantly, how to communicate empathy and encouragement to seniors navigating vision loss. Frank shared his story with raw honesty, describing the loneliness and fear that once threatened to consume him, and how the technology was a beacon in the dark. "This isn't just about devices," he said, voice steady but heartfelt. "It's about reminding each other that no matter our age or limits, we still have value, purpose, and the power to change our stories." The room was silent, then erupted in applause. Over the next few hours, personal stories flowed freely. Volunteers and participants alike spoke of lost dreams and newfound hope. Carl, the former carpenter, demonstrated how the wristband had restored his confidence to navigate his workshop safely. Ruth, the artist, showed sketches inspired by her sensory rediscovery of the world. Mary shared updates from Appalachia, her voice vibrant with determination. As the sun climbed high, Frank found a quiet moment outside beneath an ancient oak tree. The gentle breeze carried the laughter and chatter from inside, and for a moment, he allowed himself to breathe deeply, soaking in the scene. This was the transformation he dreamed of, not just for himself, but for an entire community. Yet amid the optimism, a letter lay unopened on his desk, bearing news from the FDA. It detailed regulatory hurdles that threatened to delay the project's wider distribution, citing concerns about safety and long-term effects. The weight of bureaucracy was a stark reminder that progress was often slower and messier than hope alone could conquer. That night, Frank gathered the team to discuss next steps. Lisa proposed an aggressive plan to collect more data and launch additional trials to address the concerns. Emily suggested engaging patient advocacy groups to amplify voices and apply public pressure. Noah offered to develop an app that could help users track their experiences and provide real-time feedback. The collaboration reignited Frank's fire. Though obstacles remained, the collective will was stronger than ever. The following weeks were a whirlwind of meetings, tests, and outreach. Frank found himself traveling to Washington, D.C., meeting with policymakers and advocates, sharing not just technical details but stories that humanize the technology's impact. He spoke of Gloria, who had walked unaided for the first time in years, of George, who'd returned to his garden, of Linda, who had reunited with her estranged son thanks to renewed confidence. His testimony was raw and compelling, painting a portrait of resilience that transcended numbers and charts. One evening, after a marathon session with regulators, Frank returned to his hotel exhausted. Sitting on the balcony, he gazed at the city lights twinkling below, feeling the weight of responsibility settle deeply. Doubt crept in, was the fight worth the toll? But then his phone buzzed. It was a message from Ruth. "Frank, I painted again today. It's imperfect, but it's mine. Thank you for helping me see my world once more." The words ignited something fierce inside him. The struggle was never just about approval or funding, it was about reclaiming life. Energized, Frank pressed on. Back home, the team unveiled the app Noah had developed. Designed with seniors in mind, it offered simple, accessible tools to monitor progress, report issues, and connect with support networks. Early feedback was overwhelmingly positive, creating a new channel of communication that strengthened trust and engagement. As summer waned, the Lightback community grew beyond expectation. Workshops expanded into neighboring states, virtual support groups flourished, and media stories highlighted the project's human impact. Frank was invited to speak at universities, hospitals, and senior centers nationwide, each time sharing the core message: it's never too late to change your story. One evening, as autumn's first chill whispered through the trees, Frank received a surprise visit from Elon Musk himself. Their first meeting had been years earlier, but this time Elon came not as a distant inspiration but as a collaborator, interested in how the project could integrate with his new neural technology ventures. Their conversation was a blend of technical jargon and profound reflection. Elon admired the resilience and ingenuity behind Lightback and proposed joint research initiatives. But more than that, he expressed something Frank had never expected: a genuine respect and friendship. "You've turned what many saw as an ending into a new frontier," Elon said, eyes bright. "That's the kind of future I want to build." Frank felt a swell of gratitude and humility. The journey had been long and hard, but moments like this reaffirmed the power of connection. As Elon departed, Frank stood on the porch watching the stars emerge, feeling the full weight and lightness of his path. He thought of the countless seniors whose lives were transformed, the volunteers who believed in the mission, and the family who had stood by him through every high and low. In the silence of the night, Frank whispered a promise: to keep pushing, dreaming, and building a world where no one was left in darkness. Because as Elon had taught him, the future belonged to those who dared to challenge limits, embrace fear, and see with more than just their eyes. The first chill of autumn crept into the air, the crispness carrying the scent of fallen leaves and distant fires. Frank sat in the quiet of his workshop, surrounded by humming machines and sketches, the steady pulse of the Lightback devices filling the space with a comforting rhythm. The journey had been long, marked by moments of triumph and struggle, but tonight he felt an unfamiliar calm. The FDA had approved the expanded trials, and the community programs were thriving. More than that, the stories kept coming: letters, calls, emails from seniors whose lives were transforming in ways they hadn't imagined possible. Frank's phone buzzed with a message from Gloria, the woman who had taken her first unaided steps months ago. "I'm planting my garden again," she wrote. "I never thought I'd see this season." That simple sentence was a beacon, a reminder that behind every technical breakthrough was a human heart reclaiming its light. Emily entered, carrying 2 mugs of tea, her presence a steady comfort in the swirling whirlwind of Frank's mind. "You've been quiet all afternoon," she said softly. "What's on your mind?" Frank looked up, a small smile breaking through. "Just thinking about how far we've come. How many people we've touched." She sat beside him, fingers brushing his arm. "And how many more to come." Together, they reviewed plans for the next phase: international outreach. The technology was poised to reach seniors worldwide, adapting to different languages, cultures, and needs. Frank marveled at the thought. What began in a small garage had grown into a movement with global heartbeat. Yet, amidst the excitement, challenges lingered. The technology required constant refinement, and some seniors faced obstacles adapting to new devices. To address this, Frank partnered with community leaders and healthcare workers to develop personalized training programs, ensuring no one was left behind. The process was slow, painstaking, but every breakthrough renewed their commitment. One afternoon, Frank visited a local senior center where a group of users gathered weekly to share experiences and troubleshoot challenges. The room buzzed with laughter and camaraderie, a vibrant tapestry of stories woven through shared struggle and hope. Ruth, the artist, unveiled a new painting, an abstract burst of colors and shapes inspired by her evolving perception of the world. "This is what hope looks like," she said, eyes shining. Frank felt a lump in his throat. Moments like these were the true victory. Beyond technology, beyond trials, it was the reclamation of identity and joy. Back in the garage, Noah and Lisa worked side by side, their youthful energy a reminder of the future unfolding. Noah shared his excitement about developing a new sensory feedback system that could enhance the wristband's precision, while Lisa strategized partnerships with tech companies to improve accessibility. Frank watched them with pride and gratitude. Their passion rekindled his own. Yet, not all news was good. A key funding source announced budget cuts, threatening to slow expansion plans. The blow was heavy, a stark reminder that progress was never guaranteed. That night, Frank sat alone, the weight of uncertainty pressing down. Doubt whispered insidiously, was the work enough? Could they overcome the setbacks? In the quiet, he turned to a worn journal filled with Elon Musk's words of persistence and vision. One phrase stood out: persistence is very important. You should not give up unless you are forced to give up. The words were a lifeline. With renewed resolve, Frank rallied the team. They brainstormed creative funding avenues, crowdfunding campaigns, grant applications, collaborations with nonprofits. The community responded with overwhelming support, donations pouring in from strangers touched by the mission. The movement was no longer just a project, it was a cause embraced by many. Months later, Frank found himself standing at a podium in a packed auditorium at a national innovation summit. The crowd was diverse: scientists, entrepreneurs, seniors, advocates, all drawn by the promise of technology that bridged generations and abilities. Frank spoke from the heart, weaving the technical breakthroughs with personal stories of courage and transformation. "We're not just restoring sight," he said. "We're restoring hope, dignity, and connection. We're proving that age is not a cage but a doorway." The audience rose in a standing ovation, the energy palpable. Afterward, a young woman approached him with tears in her eyes. "My grandmother was losing hope," she said. "Thanks to your work, she's smiling again." Frank's heart swelled. It was for moments like this he'd endured every hardship. As autumn deepened, the team prepared for the next wave of international pilots. Frank traveled to Europe and Asia, meeting with partners, sharing knowledge, and learning from different cultures' approaches to aging and disability. Each encounter enriched his understanding and strengthened the global network. One evening, in a quiet Parisian café, Frank reflected on the journey. The losses, the setbacks, the breakthroughs, they were all threads in a tapestry of resilience. He realized that the invention was more than technology, it was a symbol of what humanity could achieve when fear gave way to hope. Returning home, Frank was greeted by a new letter. This one from a man named Samuel in a small Alaskan town. Samuel's story was simple but powerful. After decades of blindness, he had used the light-back device to navigate the world outside his cabin, reconnecting with nature and his community. The letter ended with words that echoed Frank's own journey: "It's never too late to see a new horizon." As winter approached, Frank sat once more by the window, watching snowflakes dance in the cold air. The path ahead remained uncertain, but the flame inside him burned brighter than ever. In the silence, he whispered a truth he'd come to live: age is just a number. Vision is more than sight. And every ending is the start of a new beginning. Winter had settled deeply over the town, blanketing rooftops and streets in a quiet hush that seemed to slow time itself. Inside his modest home, Frank sat by the fireplace, a soft glow flickering against the walls lined with photographs, portraits of family, moments frozen in warmth and love. The season brought introspection, a time when the world outside rested beneath the cold, and the mind wandered through memories and dreams. Tonight, Frank found himself reflecting on the journey that had transformed not only his life but the lives of countless others. The Lightback project had grown beyond his wildest hopes, touching communities from bustling cities to remote villages. What had started as a spark of inspiration fueled by Elon Musk's fearless pursuit of the impossible had ignited a movement of hope, resilience, and renewal. Yet, even as progress marched forward, Frank felt the familiar ache of aging, the subtle reminders in his joints, the moments when his vision faltered, the quiet fears that lingered beneath determination. One evening, as snowflakes drifted gently outside, Frank received a call from Emily. Her voice was steady but tinged with urgency. "Frank, we have a situation," she said. "One of our participants, Helen, is struggling. She's discouraged, feeling overwhelmed by the technology. She's considering giving up." Helen was a woman in her late 70s, one of the earliest users of the Lightback device. Her story had touched the team deeply. Once an avid gardener, she had lost much of her independence with failing vision. The device had given her glimpses of light, but adapting to it was proving harder than expected. Frank knew this moment was crucial. Giving up was easy when the road was steep, persistence was the true test of courage. He promised Emily he'd visit Helen the next day. Driving through snow-dusted streets, Frank felt the familiar mixture of hope and responsibility settle over him. When he arrived at Helen's cozy home, the warmth inside contrasted with the winter chill outside. Helen greeted him with a tired smile, eyes clouded with frustration. They sat together in her living room, the hum of the heater mingling with the quiet crackle of a small fire. Frank listened as Helen spoke of fear and doubt, the overwhelming complexity, the isolation, the ache of lost dreams. He didn't rush to offer solutions. Instead, he shared his own story, the darkest moments when he felt invisible and forgotten. "I understand how hard this is," he said gently. "But giving up means accepting that this is all there is. And I believe there's more for you, more joy, more connection. Sometimes, the hardest step is the one that keeps us moving forward." Over the next hours, they worked together, breaking down the challenges into manageable steps. Frank showed Helen how to customize the device, how to reach out to support groups, how to celebrate small victories. They talked about her garden, how she could reimagine it through touch and memory, blending old passions with new possibilities. As the evening deepened, Helen's eyes brightened with a fragile hope. "Maybe this is a new kind of sight," she said softly. "Not just with my eyes, but with my heart." Frank left her home with a renewed sense of purpose. These moments, intimate, challenging, deeply human, were the true heart of their work. Back at the workshop, the team gathered to share updates. Lisa presented new user-friendly interface designs aimed at reducing complexity, while Noah unveiled enhancements that improved sensory feedback. The collaboration was fueled by compassion as much as innovation. News arrived that a major tech conference wanted Frank to keynote, a platform to share the project's impact and inspire a broader audience. Standing on the stage months later, Frank looked out at a sea of faces, many younger but all curious and attentive. He spoke not just of technology, but of courage, the courage to face fear, to redefine what was possible at any age. "We all carry light inside us," he said. "Sometimes it just takes a spark to ignite it again." The applause was thunderous, but it was the conversations afterward, the stories shared, the connections made, that stayed with Frank. Among the crowd was a man named David, a retired teacher who had lost his sight to macular degeneration. David approached Frank with a quiet resolve. "I want to help others like me," he said. "To be part of this change." Inspired, Frank welcomed David to join the growing network of ambassadors, bridging the gap between invention and community. Winter stretched on, and the Lightback family expanded. Workshops flourished, volunteer networks strengthened, and feedback loops improved the technology. The movement was no longer just about restoring sight, it was about restoring agency, dignity, and hope. One snowy evening, as Frank prepared for bed, a notification popped up on his phone, a live stream from Elon Musk himself. Elon spoke about innovation, resilience, and the power of daring to dream, echoing the very themes that had driven Frank's journey. Watching, Frank felt a surge of gratitude, not just for the technology Elon had inspired, but for the spirit of relentless pursuit that had become his own compass. The next morning brought unexpected news. A foundation dedicated to aging and disability had awarded Project Lightback a substantial grant, recognizing its potential to transform lives globally. The team erupted in celebration, tears mingling with laughter. But for Frank, the true victory was quieter, the steady pulse of progress, the smiles of seniors reclaiming their world, the knowledge that age was no longer a cage but a gateway. As the snow melted and spring beckoned, Frank stood once again beneath the stars, feeling the full circle of his journey. He was no longer a man waiting for permission to matter. He was a beacon, a guide, a living testament to the power of hope, innovation, and the unbreakable human spirit. "This is just the beginning," he whispered to the night. And in that promise, the future shone brighter than ever. Spring had fully arrived, and with it, a sense of renewal that coursed through every corner of Frank's life. The once quiet town now buzzed with stories of transformation, whispered in cafes and shouted from community stages. The Lightback project had become more than a technology, it was a movement, a testament to what human courage and connection could accomplish when fueled by relentless hope. Frank stood in the bustling community center, the air thick with anticipation and joy. Today was the culmination of years of tireless work, the first annual Lightback celebration, a day dedicated to honoring the seniors whose lives had been touched and the volunteers who had made it possible. Colorful banners hung from the rafters, children's laughter mingled with the hum of conversations, and everywhere, faces shone with pride and gratitude. Frank's heart swelled as he watched Gloria leading a gardening workshop, her hands steady and sure, her smile radiant as she shared her renewed passion. Ruth's artwork adorned the walls, vibrant and alive, a visual symphony of rediscovered senses. Helen was there too, her steps confident as she navigated the room with the Lightback device, her eyes bright with determination. The event was more than celebration, it was a declaration that aging was not an end but a beginning. As the crowd gathered for Frank's keynote speech, he felt the familiar flutter of nerves, but also the steady anchor of purpose. Taking the stage, he looked out at the faces, each a story of resilience, each a beacon of possibility. "When I first lost my sight," Frank began, voice steady, "I thought my world was ending. I thought I was fading away, forgotten by time and chance. But today, I see something different. I see a community bound by hope, driven by courage, and empowered by technology that helps us see, not just with our eyes, but with our hearts." The applause was thunderous, but it was the tears in the crowd that told the true story. Tears of joy, relief, and profound connection. After the speech, Frank mingled with attendees, each conversation a thread in the tapestry of healing and growth. A young woman approached him, introducing herself as Maya, a college student studying neuroscience. "Your story inspired my thesis," she said. "I want to work on devices that empower seniors like your community." Frank smiled, the future bright in her eyes. He knew the work would continue, carried forward by new hands and fresh dreams. As the sun dipped low, casting golden light through the windows, Frank stepped outside to breathe in the cool evening air. Emily joined him, her presence a comforting constant. They spoke softly about the journey, the trials, the victories, the moments that had defined them. "Do you ever think about what comes next?" she asked. Frank nodded. "I do. But I also know this isn't the end. It's the start of something bigger, something that will outlast us." They stood together beneath the stars, the quiet night filled with promise. Weeks later, Frank received a letter from Elon Musk himself. The note was brief but powerful, filled with encouragement and admiration. Elon wrote, "Your journey embodies the spirit of innovation. Not just in technology but in humanity. Keep pushing the boundaries. The future is yours to shape." Frank folded the letter carefully, a smile spreading across his face. It was more than validation, it was a call to continue dreaming. The final pages of his own story were still being written. One morning, Frank visited the hospital wing where several seniors were testing the latest version of the light-back device. He watched as a man in his 80s reached out tentatively to touch a bouquet of flowers, his face lighting up with wonder. Nearby, a woman traced the edges of a photo frame, her fingers trembling as memories stirred. In those moments, Frank saw the essence of their mission, not just to restore sight but to restore life. Walking back to his car, he paused beneath a towering oak, leaves whispering in the breeze. He thought of the young man who had doubted his worth, the skeptical doctor who had warned him to slow down, the lonely nights filled with regret. None of that mattered now. What mattered was this: he had changed his story. He had chosen to see possibility where others saw endings. As he drove home, Frank's phone buzzed with a message from Helen: "I planted tulips today. For the first time in years. Thank you for helping me see my spring." He smiled, the simple words carrying a world of meaning. Sitting by his window that night, Frank reflected on the lessons etched deep within him. Aging was not a fading, it was a transformation. Limits were not barriers, they were invitations to innovate. And within every heart lay a spark waiting to ignite. Closing his eyes, he whispered to the quiet room, "I was never too old. I was just waiting for permission to matter again." And with that, a new chapter began, not just for Frank, but for all those who dared to dream beyond their years. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?